World of Tanks Blitz is suffering from the absolute misery that was the first Reforged release, and now the desperate attempt for Wargaming to claw back the declining player base to a auction that's just not really that good, and nobody really buys anything either. I mean, there's even the 1030 Bs left here. This auction is not it, and neither are the shop offers. I mean, this is just a waste of space. Nobody needs this. So the game isn't looking all too good. However, there are ways out of this. There are things in this game that still make it all worth it to a certain degree. And one of those things is a vehicle that has been there since the beginning, and that is the almighty E50M. And I'm not going to review this thing. This is not a review of the E50M. This is a celebration of the E50M, because if you don't experience it, you don't know what it is. But let's start off small. Let's start off, how do you equip this vehicle? Obviously, standard consumables. It does have reactive armor, but you don't need reactive armor on the E50M. You just don't. If you need reactive armor on the E50M, you ain't playing it right. Then, obviously, you need some chocolate, because why not? I mean, it is already a massive vehicle, but more chocolate always helps. And the ammo, have I reviewed tanks before? Yes, I've been reviewing tanks for a very long time, and have I said the same thing pretty much every time? For every single standard gun that's ever exists, basically, you load a lot of standard rounds, a little bit less premium rounds, and a little bit of HE. Diagonal line all the way through. I mean, you can do this. This looks weird, right? It doesn't look proper, or like this doesn't make sense, right? This is weird. So what do? You simply do that. You got yourself a nice diagonal line. Everything aligns well. Looks nice. And you pretty much have the perfect ammo lot anyway, in most cases. So you don't have to think much. But obviously, if you have vehicles that have like HESH or stuff like that, it doesn't really apply. But for pretty much every standard loadout of tank, this is sort of somewhat optimal way of loading out the vehicle. Now then, the equipment for the E50M. Well, you got the calibrated shells, because all the way back in the day when medium tanks had 330 heat penetration before the system. Now they don't, but with calibrated shells, you can get that up to 339 on the 50M. And the DPM only gives you 172, so it's not really going to help you much. But the 39 extra heat pen pretty much gets you through E100s, mouses, and everything that you want to shoot at. Then you want the improved modules, because it's an E50M. It's good at ramming. So obviously, you're going to improve that by minus 40% damage when rammed. Obviously, optics is a no-brainer. Everything that's not a campy tank is benefiting from the optics. I use optics on tank destroyers. If you fire, the camo net's useless anyway, so it doesn't help you much. The old camo net was quite effective, but if you fire your gun, any camouflage you have goes out the window anyway. Obviously, the enhanced gun laying drive, I would use the enhanced armor because it's a very well-angled vehicle, and while you do benefit from 76 extra hit points, it doesn't really do anything. The 3% extra armor, the more angled your tank is, the better angle it is, the more you benefit from the enhanced armor, because obviously it increases the thickness by 3%, but because the armor is angled, the relative thickness is increased by more than 3%. Obviously, the engine accelerator, I don't know why improved control even exists. You don't need it for anything. Vertical stabilizer, toolbox, and consumable delivery system. That is how you load out the 50M. Now, what are the stats, what's the armor, and how do you properly enjoy the beauty that is the 50M? Starting off with the DPM, and it is pretty solid already at 3,600, which is higher than the majority of other tier 10 mediums. The penetration is pretty much in line with all the others, with 3 penetration difference. You will never notice that in battle, ever. The 4202 has a little bit more, but it does have HESH's premium round, so that matches out. And the KPZ 50T. And for example, the Leopard 1 obviously have higher DPM than that, but they have no armor whatsoever. 340 alpha damage here. The 628 is 330. Used to have 310, and this one used to have 350, but Wargaming had to change all of them for the sake of change. So here we are. Shell velocity, even reload, obviously just about fine. Once you have above 1,000 shell velocity, it doesn't really matter anymore how much you have, because you're going to hit the shots anyway. In the weapon handling, we have 1.72 aim time, which is the same as 628, and also the STB1, so very good there. The dispersion is better than average. The Leopard, the FE4202, and the KPZ-50T can match with that as well, but for example, the 121 doesn't really have that good dispersion, but generally, the difference between 0.308 and 0.317, you cannot tell that in battle, so essentially, it does have better aim time and dispersion than most of the other mediums, but you're not really going to notice. gun depression of 8 degrees, which is very good because that it is more than the Soviet-style vehicles, but it is obviously less than a STB with its 11 degrees. But with 8 degrees, you can pretty much play most positions that are going to be relevant in the game. So absolutely no downsides here once again, and either average or above average compared to all the other mediums right here. And then we have the mobility, where it does lack a little bit because the effective power to weight ratio, ouch, compared to a 60-8 or a 1-1, so it doesn't move quite as quickly. However, it is faster, weirdly enough, than a K-Pacific or a STB-1, despite its hefty weight of 61 tons. For example, a 60-8 only weighs 36. That's another story. So the mobility is not really matching up to something like a 60-8, but it can definitely keep up with an M48 Patton or a STB-1. But obviously these vehicles, they are going to accelerate quite a bit quicker because that is what effective power to weight ratio is about. It's about acceleration. So acceleration isn't really that great. The Traverse of 44, yeah, it's enough. Like, you don't need 56. It's lovely to have 56, but 44 is plenty enough to do whatever you need to be. So we actually do have a downside here with the E50M. Obviously, it is a heavy boy, so it's just going to be a little bit harder to traverse, but nonetheless, it does do really well. Camera rating, I mean, it's a big chonker, but if you're firing, it doesn't matter anyway. Because remember this, camera rating only matters when you don't want to shoot at someone. With that said, we now look at the thing, as you can already see here, whereas there's a lot of red on the other side of why the E50M is as good as it is. Now, one of the main highlights of the E50M is its excellent armor for a medium tank. Now, if you've seen any of my videos ever, then you will know that this vehicle, in fact, does have a weak spot in the lower plate of the vehicle. However, you have 8 degrees of gun depression, which means you can hide that lower plate to play hull down, which is what you should do with pretty much any tank. If you can't hide your lower plate, you're not in a good position to peek in most cases, be it via side scraping or by hiding behind a piece of rubble. If you can't hide your lower plate in a tank, that peek is most likely not optimal. However, what is optimal is the upper plate, because it is very thick, and especially if you use the gun depression, nobody's going to get through that ever. Now, the turret, 300mm, which can be penned by a lot of premium rounds. The sides of the turret are also 300mm. However, there's this fun little magic trick that's called keeping your vehicle moving when you're not shooting and not exposing yourself when you're not shooting, which means that you don't peek the enemy if you're not currently firing, and if you are peeking the enemy, you keep your vehicle moving so that the enemy is going to have a lot harder time to actually hit you, because the gun mantlet is quite prominent in the middle of this tank, so it is going to be a tough time to actually hit this turret right here because it's not really that big. So if you keep the vehicle moving, if you keep it wiggling, then a lot of enemies will simply not have a chance to actually pen you. It's very simple. It does have a cupola on top, but it's pretty much so tiny that unless you're stationary, which you should never be, unless you're in a vehicle that has a very large aim time, then nobody's ever going to hit that. Right? But if you obviously sit out in the open, stationary, you're going to get penned everywhere. However, the sides of this vehicle are also excellent because it does have this side skirt right here, and it also has over 100mm of side armor, which means that you can side scrape this vehicle very well. So whatever you do, you can side scrape this thing off any rock, off anything. But obviously remember, if you peek and you aim at an enemy, they can shoot at your turret. So if you wait too long, if you sit around in the open, you're going to get shot. So being fast is important in any tank, but being fast in the E50M will make you almost invincible. And now let's get into battle with the E50M. All the way at the beginning, this was my very first tier 10 tank in the entire game. However, back then, it didn't have the amazing turret armor that it does have now, which means it was a lot weaker. But since it got the turret armor upgrade, obviously Wargaming tried to nerf it a little bit by reducing the alpha damage from 350 to 340, but really that's not going to make too much of a difference right there, because this gun is still extremely lovely. And look at this, is exactly what I talked about in the armor section. The guy's peeking sideways. I'm hull down, and he's still there peeking sideways. Obviously, those guys, they sort of have to traverse that area, but P50M, he's standing there sideways, and whenever you're exposed to the enemy and you're not firing at the enemy, look at that guy. He has no idea what he's doing, right? I'm here, I'm hull down, I'm in a perfect position, and he has absolutely zero clue how to play the game. He's sideways, he's not angling, he's not even firing at anybody, and now he's dead. So the main difference between a good player and a bad player in the same tank is exactly that. I know what I'm doing. I know who can shoot me. I see that 183 over there on the side because I'm not tunnel visioning on one vehicle. I'm always keeping everything in my sight. I know there's a concept there. I know there's a 183 there. I know that if I do this, I can take a shot at the 183 and he won't be able to reply because I am fast enough to peek and he won't have a chance to reply. Now, again, I'm going to peek. Why? Because I'm quick. I peek quickly. Obviously, it is a lot easier to do on PC than on the phone, but again, he's dead. He never even had a chance to fire because I sent it in fast. And that is the advantage of the E50M, that this vehicle is massive. It's very well armored, but it's also incredibly quick. And if you know how to play it, then you're gonna have a great time. Now, you see me here, I'm peeking sideways. This isn't optimal, but at this point, I've done 4,000 damage. Who the hell cares? Now this, Yaw, and that Concept 1B. Do I want to fight them? Absolutely not, because I always want to fight an unfair fight. Against that enemy E50M, that was an unfair fight. Against the 183, that was an unfair fight because I'm faster and I've got more hit points and I can just peek it, man. I got a better gun with better aim time. So, do I want to fight an M6 and do I want to fight a Concept? Hell no, I don't. I'm going to get out of there and I'm going to remove myself from that position as quickly as possible. Now I'm going to drive around and get behind the Concept right here. He might shoot me, but I have plenty of hit points to deal with that. And now again, my team is on the other side and I'm behind the Concept. So whatever that Concept does, he can either try to focus on me or on the rest of my team, but he can't do both. And this is another very important thing to consider. Not only do you have to be fast and aware of everything, you also never want to be in front of the enemy, right? Because if you're in front of the enemy, well, that's most likely where the enemy's gun is pointing. But if you're in a medium tank and you're on the side of the enemy and you're not exactly in the same position as your team, you can just shoot a lot of people because they will be focusing on your team instead of you. And if they start focusing on you, guess what? You disappear. And you always want to be in a position where you have the ability to disappear. If you don't know your exit plan before your entry plan, you should never get yourself in a position. And that is 5,700 damage without any effort, really. I mean, did I have to think much? Did I have to do much for that? No. It's simply just be quick, be in the right place at the right time, and don't be like that enemy E50M that just stood out in the open sideways. If you're out in the open without cover, that's your fault. You know, that's not the enemy team or your team being noobs or whatever, and you can influence a lot in a battle simply by doing better yourself. Obviously, there's another level to where you start using your team and making your team more effective, but we're not even going to go into that because the E50M on its own is effective enough, right? This is an absolute beast in the right hands. Now, what I'm going to do here, I'm not going to push in too much because I know they have a 1-to-1B and I know they also have a Sheridan. The Sheridan has 560 alpha damage, and even though the E50M has very good armor and great mobility, I don't want to peek fight that because on a 1v1 peek, that is a massive advantage for the Sheridan. Now, what am I doing here? Am I simply sitting behind that house? No, I'm looking at the map. I understand the map. I know that Jagdpanzer in the city is vulnerable to me. I know that that CC, if he reverses, is vulnerable to me. So now I'm just going to sit here. We can also see the Sheridan on the minimap. So now we know exactly where he is, and here's the 268. That thinks he's a medium tank. Now, where do I aim? It's track, of course. And now I'm going to obviously use the house right in front of me and side scrape off that. You don't have to be exactly on the house to side scrape, but he couldn't pin my side because I didn't give him anything to penetrate. And now here, I don't have to bother with that 268 right now. I don't have to tunnel vision him because he's not a threat right now, even though I do reverse a little bit too far and I get shot by him. But do I care about that right now? Not really. Now I know that there's nobody else behind him. I know the Sheridan in the 1-to-1B. Well, the Sheridan's dead and the 1-to-1B is now in the city behind the team. So what I do, now I'm going to focus on this 268 because basically he's alone here. And I can use the absolutely excellent side armor on the 50M right here around the house to destroy this guy. And now he's dead. 3,100 damage. Much effort? Not really. Have I made a mistake by peeking too far against the 268? Yes, I have. Is he dead? Yes. Because I simply made less mistakes than he did. Obviously, I'm also in an E50M. And now, there's only 3 enemies left. So what again? What do we do? I'm behind the Jagdpanzer. Would I be insane enough to approach this from the middle? Hell no, I want to be behind the enemy all the time, because even though I got massive armor, why would I need to use it if I could just avoid doing that and just straight up send it? Now again, I'm sort of wiggling my vehicle. He shoots the track. Again, I'm wiggling this vehicle. I'm not staying stationary. I'm angling this thing all the way. And that way, it's a 7-0. And this thing just works excellently. So if you don't have the E50M yet, I mean, I have it for 11 years and I've enjoyed it all the time, pretty much. I've enjoyed it less when it had less turret armor, but it is amazing. And if you don't have the E50M yet, you need to have the E50M. You don't need to review the E50M. You need to experience the E50M, because if you have never experienced the E50M, you're missing out in this, well, pretty much declining game. But if there's one last hurrah that Blitz has to offer, it's obtaining the E50M. So get it, and do it fast.